Today, for the first time, I've got a way to fight back. Becoming a lawyer is what's getting me out.
How are you here?
Hard work and goodwill. What's your method?
That's a clip from a new ABC show on ABC called For Life that aired last night. It's based on the story of Isaac Wright Jr. He's a man from the Bronx who was wrongly convicted of drug offenses, and he was given a life sentence. But Isaac, he studied and became a lawyer while he was behind bars, and it won his own freedom in the end. He also helped others to do the same. Now, this is something that happens more than most of you may think. In 2018, the most recent year that stats are available, 151 people were freed after being wrongfully convicted. They averaged 11 years behind bars per person. Now, that's what happened to Jeffrey Descovich of New York's Hudson Valley back in 2016 when he was only 17 years of age. He was wrongfully convicted of rape and murder after a forced confession, and after 16 years behind bars, DNA evidence proved his innocence and he was let out of prison. After he got out, Jeffrey went on to earn his law degree, and he's created the Descovich Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization committed to exonerating the wrongfully convicted. It's interesting, Jeffrey, because this issue has gotten a lot of attention. There's been some other national high-profile cases since your exoneration. There's even a primetime show on ABC, loosely based on a similar situation that came out of this. Why do you think now finally the attention's being paid? Is it the advent of science and DNA where there's tools now to right wrongs where it happened before, or it's just public attention's there? It just seems it's a lot more in the national consciousness than what you were up against.
Definitely the public attention. DNA, of course, is what set the stage for that. It opened that window into the justice system. But I think that through that, what's happened is that there's been kind of an explosion of people doing this type of work. There's innocence entities, and there's lots of private attorneys that are in on the act now. And it seems like someone's being exonerated once every 3 or 4 days somewhere in this country. And so with that, and with lots of media products, whether it's podcasts, television shows, The Life, like you just referred to on ABC, all of that all together, and probably half a dozen more variables are why it's in the public consciousness so much.
I want to talk with you guys are together in a second, but of the many tragedies involved in your case, obviously you lost your freedom,
Yes.
but also the person who actually committed the crime for which you were convicted of was allowed to roam free, and they killed another person. Another innocent person's life was taken as well. In your particular case, there was you were coerced to do a confession as a very young man, as a teen here, that it turned out was manufactured. It's not just getting the wrong guy. There's a lot of steps in the process that hopefully have changed or are in the process of changing so that what happened to you and so many other people doesn't happen again, right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Mimi, to that end, you would set up a conviction integrity unit, which currently doesn't exist. Explain what that means and why that would make a tangible change.
So a conviction integrity unit is a unit that it's not sort of based on, I didn't come up with this idea. It's based on the work, the research, the ideas of places like the Descovich Foundation, the Innocence Project, the New York State Bar Association, experts who have come together and come up with guidelines, protocols, frameworks for how a unit in a district attorney's office should look and should function in a way to make sure that not only going forward, but also looking backwards, because as you say, this is something we're newly recognizing as a problem. Well, what about all the cases that have already been done? Are there innocent people in jail now? And that is something that there's really no more important question for our justice system. And that's how I was raised as a prosecutor, and I'm glad to see it now being part of the criminal justice reform movement. You need a unit that's independent from the rest of the office. It has permanency. It reports directly to the district attorney. It has criteria that puts out ahead of time so that defense attorneys and people who are in these cases know, what do I need to have? What do I need to show to apply? Do I have to have DNA evidence, or can there be other standards that would apply? We don't want it, this isn't something to just make up as we go along. And the current DA's office has does not have this anywhere in their budget. It's not laid out what any of these kinds of forms that I'm talking about, the standards, just don't exist. So you can't, it's not something you can just say we have it without really having the substance. And it's being done in district attorney's offices around the state and around the country. And this is why I'm making it such a part of my platform, because it's so important.
I've spoken to ADAs from not just Westchester, but outside, and they said it really comes from the top and the direction from the district attorney. If there's pressure that we need a conviction, I need somebody here, if the press is on me, whatever the case may be, higher ups are leaning hard, that's where a lot of times mistakes are made. And even if there's some red flags or there's questions about a case, if those get pushed to the side, as much as evidence that wasn't pursued, that's where this can happen. Talk about the cultural part of this, because what always shocks the layperson out here is when they look back in a case, there's an exoneration, there was another viable witness, or there wasn't evidence that was turned over to the defense that would have been additive and critical to the case here, and it was moved faster than it needed to. How do you fight against that? Because there's always going to be external pressures.
Yes, although you're absolutely right. It is about changing the culture. It's about setting the tone from day one that a prosecutor's office is about doing justice, not just seeking convictions. And I know it sounds a little corny, but really, I mean, that's what I was taught from day one. And I really believe that. It's better to let a guilty person go free than an innocent person go to jail. One innocent person in jail is too much. So you need to train people from the beginning that these are your priorities as a prosecution office, and that when you do see these red flags, you have to not just drop everything, but you have to be on the lookout for them and willing to change your narrative, flexible. You can't say we have what we think happened, this is our narrative, and no matter what comes up, we're going to explain it away. So sometimes, as Jeff and I have discussed, it can be deliberate misconduct, but it can also be sort of this kind of negligence or ignorance or refusal to be flexible in your thought that leads to really serious mistakes. So you need to train people about that and change the culture.
You know what always surprised me about your story, Jeff, was if I lost the majority of my life here, considering where you started, how young you went in and how many years you spent for something you never did, the last thing I'd want to attach when I saw freedom would be the law, because the law had let me down. But you chose to not only get your law degree, but commit your career to being a justice advocate. To that end, is it, when we hear where people are asking for DNA tests and they're being refused, is it the evidence? What part levels the playing field more for us on the outside that we wouldn't realize? What, if you can wave a wand, not just for your case, and not just even for this county, but even beyond that, what would make things fairer that currently is not?
Acknowledgement on the part of the district attorney's offices that wrongful convictions can and do happen. And so that means not having the tunnel vision that Mimi just referenced. That means being willing to take a step back approach and analyze a case on the front end, but not just taking a file that the police bring you and then prosecuting. It means also having conviction review unit. It means studying wrongful conviction cases once an exoneration happens, not just in this county, but anywhere in the country, looking at that, extracting what red flags, what lessons can be applied. So right now, that's not happening in Westchester. And it also means that having a congruence. So if the district attorney's office claims that they're anti-wrongful conviction, they're going to be proactive about it, then that means you're supposed to speak up at the legislature when bills are introduced that would directly prevent wrongful convictions, such as videotaping interrogations completely. No more exceptions, no more second-degree murder, sex offense, drug cases where that's going to be an exception. That means speaking up to have an oversight board commission on prosecutor conduct. And the current district attorney doesn't do that. A real conviction review unit has named people, it has a budget. That's all that they do. There is a level of independence of it as well, and there's an outside consultant involved also. That's not present here.
And it sounds very small in the big scheme of things, but I've been surprised when I've spoken to other people sitting in your chair that went through this. They don't even get a sorry sometimes, even though half their lives are destroyed. And what people don't realize is if they had families on the outside, sometimes the families move on, or they believe that their father, their husband, whatever the case may be, really did it, and they don't want the association. So even when they get their freedom, they can't put their lives back together. I assumed a sorry was part of the equation, but that's not always the case.
It often isn't the case. Like, I never got an apology from any of the people that were involved. A lot of people that are exonerated, they kind of get a kick in the pants on the way out the door, because the prosecutor will say something like, well, we can't retry this case now, but we don't consider, you know, him or her to be innocent. So they keep that stain, that stigma, you know, around. If I can just back up just a half point before, you know, when there is a real conviction review unit, like, the results can be breathtaking. Like in Brooklyn, when Ken Thompson was the DA, 23 people were exonerated in 2.5 years. When Craig Watkins was the Dallas district attorney, more than 40 people were exonerated. So having this real unit, and that's what they focus on, I mean, you could never free that many innocent people, like, on the outside through, like, a nonprofit model, you know. And that's why I think it's so important who we have in the district attorney's office.
Sounds like a good endorsement. Well, Jeffrey, continued good luck, and Mimi, good luck here in the upcoming campaign. And again, it's called the Conviction Integrity Unit. Obviously, the county doesn't have one now, but they would if there is a new DA. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.